I never swiped a single card. Yet my credit collapsed like a snow-rotted roof in the first storm of winter. She found a stack of bank statements tucked neatly inside her late husband's empty wine box. Every page showed luxury transactions she never made, paid with 5 credit cards bearing her name. Her jaw locked, as if she'd bitten down on a stone during an empty dinner. She sat silent in the living room, feeling erased from the very marriage she had once built. What if elder financial abuse isn't loud or violent but quiet, polished, and signed in your name? Her name was Joanne Mercer, 65 years old. She lived alone in a faded yellow house near the edge of Brookville, Pennsylvania. The house had belonged to her husband's family for 3 generations. Wide porch, creaky floorboards, a mailbox that leaned slightly left. Her husband, Howard Mercer, worked in real estate at a local agency. People liked him. He smiled easily, wore cologne too expensive for the county, and always tipped well. Their 2 children had moved out long ago. Her daughter had just given birth to her first child in Oregon. That's where Joanne had spent most of her winter helping with midnight feedings, warm baths, tiny clothes. Howard had insisted. "You go." He said, "Let me handle things here." So she went. She trusted him. He had always managed the money, the bills, the taxes. They had no secrets. At least, that's what she told herself. When she returned home in early March, the house looked just the same. Dusty windows, an unopened newspaper on the front steps. She didn't see the empty wine bottle in the sink or the missing lamp from the hallway. Not yet. One morning, she opened a drawer to find an unfamiliar envelope. It held a receipt from a steakhouse she had never visited. When she asked, Howard said it was for a client. Then he tossed the paper into the fireplace before she could look twice. It was just a small moment, but something about it lodged inside her chest like a seed. Howard had always been generous. Too generous. Maybe. Joanne remembered Christmas gifts to co-workers that cost more than their refrigerator. He said it helped build relationships. Joanne nodded and looked away. She returned to Oregon in mid-February when her daughter needed help again. That was the last time she saw him alive. Howard died showing a house on Main Street. A sudden heart attack, they said. Paramedics arrived at 10:36 in the morning. He was pronounced dead by 11:15. Joanne flew back the same day. She planned the funeral, received neighbors, shook hands at church. She slept in their bed without turning to his side. A week later, she called the bank to close the joint accounts. The woman on the line paused and said there were still 5 active credit cards under Joanne's name. Joanne blinked. "I don't have any credit cards," she said. The woman explained. 5 cards, all opened as authorized user accounts, all in her name, all linked to Howard's primary accounts. The balance $92,000, all unpaid. Joanne's ears buzzed. She hung up and stood still in the kitchen for a long time. Later that night, she pulled out a box of Howard's belongings from under the sink. Inside was a wine bottle, half full, and a stack of sealed envelopes marked statements. She opened them one by one. High-end restaurants, nightclubs, expensive perfumes, jewelry. Even a weekend booking at a boutique hotel 2 counties away. Every charge had her name on the line. In the back of the box, she found another envelope. This one wasn't sealed. It held crumpled notes and receipts, some with handwriting she didn't recognize. Phrases like gift for Lisa, help for Nancy, extra tip, names she'd never heard, amounts she didn't want to believe. She sat down and stared at her hands. The next day, she called one of Howard's old co-workers. The man was quiet, then said gently, "He spent a lot of time at Havana Blue. It's a bar downtown, young women, late hours. They called him Mr. Red Wine." That night, Joanne didn't cry. She sat in the living room, lights off, listening to the refrigerator hum. She poured herself a glass of water, then poured it back. She looked at the framed photo from their 25th anniversary and turned it face down. She never touched the wine bottle. It took her 3 more days to find the courage to look at her credit report. Her score had dropped over 200 points. She remembered how Howard used to say, "You don't need to worry about money." And she didn't. Not until now. What she faced wasn't just betrayal. It was elder financial abuse. The kind that doesn't come with bruises or broken windows, but with envelopes and silence and polite lies told over dinner. She met with a lawyer who specialized in probate and family law. Together, they traced the timeline of the spending, cross-referenced it with Howard's travel receipts, and built a case showing the debt had no connection to household needs. The purchases were personal, hidden, purposeful. It wasn't just deception, it was marriage fraud. She filed letters with each credit card company, stating clearly she had not signed, used, or authorized the accounts. She attached Howard's death certificate and the lawyer's findings. 2 of the companies agreed to remove her from the balance. The others reduced the debt under hardship review, but the damage had already bled through. Because of debt after death, her claim to the house was tangled. Howard had never updated the deed. Creditors filed liens. She had to sell. The lawyer helped, but she still walked away with little more than her name. That night, she whispered to the dark, "You never meant to leave me with nothing, but that's what you did." No one answered, and the fridge kept humming. It began with a lie of omission, the kind that doesn't require a spoken word, just a long enough silence. Joanne had believed that love meant not having to check. Not questioning her husband's choices felt like trust. In reality, it was surrender. The quiet unraveling of financial control didn't happen in one day. It happened over years. With every "don't worry about it," she handed over one more key. That was the root of everything, the belief that peace in marriage came from not looking too closely. Howard's behavior wasn't loud or careless. It was methodical, calculated. He didn't forge documents. He didn't steal. He simply used her trust as his permission. 5 credit cards opened with her name, not joint accounts, authorized user cards attached to his. Enough to build debt, enough to damage her name. All while she was away rocking her grandchild to sleep. This wasn't just irresponsibility. It was financial infidelity, a long-term deception disguised as loyalty. And the worst part, no one noticed. Not even her. The law was not built to catch this kind of betrayal easily. Joanne learned that most states, including Pennsylvania, follow the principle of equitable distribution. That meant assets and debts accumulated during marriage could be considered shared, even if only one spouse signed for them. Unless a formal prenuptial or postnuptial agreement existed, the burden would fall where the evidence was thinnest. Joanne had never checked the statements. She had never refused. And silence, in legal terms, is rarely enough to prove innocence. But that didn't mean she was without options. The first thing she did was meet with a family and estate lawyer. Together, they reviewed the spending trail. The lawyer helped her separate the charges that directly benefited the marriage groceries, utilities, shared travel from the ones that clearly didn't, lavish dinners, bar tabs, boutique hotel rooms, purchases labeled as gifts for women whose names she had never heard. This wasn't shared spending. It wasn't accidental. It was targeted, secret, purposeful. They drafted a statement outlining her lack of consent and submitted it to the estate probate court, arguing that these debts were not marital obligations. Her lawyer cited previous cases in the state involving elder financial abuse and family betrayal story patterns, particularly those where one spouse used the other's identity to live a double life. Next, Joanne filed formal disputes with each credit card issuer. She included a death certificate, a notarized affidavit denying her awareness of the accounts, and documentation prepared by her attorney. 2 companies accepted her claim and cleared the debt. The others negotiated partial settlements based on hardship and fraud review. She didn't stop there. With her lawyer's help, she submitted fraud alerts to all 3 major credit bureaus. Her credit score had dropped significantly, but the alerts helped prevent further damage. Notes were added to her file clarifying that the accounts had been used without informed consent. There was no full recovery, but there was clarity. Joanne had not been careless. She had been deceived, and once she stopped blaming herself, she began to act not as a victim, but as a woman reclaiming her legal and financial ground. That was the first real victory she had in months. Joanne didn't rebuild her life in one sweeping motion. She did it quietly, in pieces, like stitching a quilt from fabric that still smelled faintly of smoke. The house where she had lived for more than 30 years was the first thing to go. The lawyer helped her sort through the liens, the remaining debts, the probate process. In the end, she sold it to a young couple expecting twins. She left behind the creaking floors, the wine stain in the kitchen corner, the garden that had once been Howard's pride. She moved into a smaller apartment closer to her daughter's home in Eugene, Oregon. The place was modest, with 2 rooms and a balcony that looked out onto a narrow street lined with elm trees. For the first time in months, she could sleep without imagining the refrigerator humming over lies. She signed up for a watercolor class at the local senior center, not because she wanted to become an artist, but because it gave her something to hold in her hands besides grief. The brush moved clumsily at first, the colors bleeding into each other, but the instructor said, "Even mistakes make beauty," and she believed him. Each week, she painted. Each week, her posture straightened a little more. One morning, her grandson visited and pointed to one of her paintings, 4 empty chairs beneath a willow tree. "Is that where you used to live?" he asked. She nodded, but she didn't cry. At church, she was invited to speak to a small group of older women about financial awareness. She didn't think anyone would want to hear her story, but when she finished, a woman in the back raised her hand and said, "That happened to me." Not the same way, but close. Joanne realized then that elder financial abuse wasn't rare. It was just rarely spoken aloud. She kept a letter from Howard, not the bills, not the statements, but one letter from their first year of marriage. It was full of hopes and small promises. She placed it in a locked drawer, not out of bitterness, but because memory doesn't always belong in plain view. She no longer checked the mail with fear. She no longer held her breath when a call came from a number she didn't recognize. There was no triumph, no final scene with a rising score, just quiet, stability. The kind that comes when a woman chooses not just to survive, but to repair. On her own terms, elder financial abuse had tried to reduce her life to credit scores and court documents. But Joanne knew better. Her name was not a balance to be settled. It was something she had reclaimed, one decision at a time.